Hello and welcome. I am Raziel and today is Monday, which means I will be talking about a faction and how to improve it in the lore. That's what I do every Monday, and I quite like doing these videos because that means I get to read the lore, I get to talk about certain factions, and it's just something I enjoy doing. I think lore in wargaming is really fun stuff, and as you all know, my favourite setting is the Wild West Exodus. And talking about favourites, we're talking about one of my favourite factions of all time, and not just for Wild West Exodus, but in any wargame, and that is the Warrior Nation. The Warrior Nation is basically the Native Americans, but they have super magical powers. They can turn into creatures. They can do all sorts of really cool things, and they are some of the best looking models I've ever seen. I did a review on legendary Walk's looking model, and she is such a gorgeous model and absolutely blast to paint and build. But today we are talking lore. But I do want to sort of divert quickly away, because one thing I would really like to see from War Cradle is the return of the tribal Retribution Box. That box was fantastic for Warrior Nations, and it gave you the named characters such as a normal Walks looking, which is also a very, very nice looking model. It also gave you two basic units, two units of Braves and Hunters. So you had what would be the start of an army. And I think that was made it fantastic. You had the named characters all in resin, and you had some plastic miniatures as well to really sort of have this nice looking box which was fit for any Warrior Nations and great for any start of a Warrior Nations force as well. And the Warrior Nations, as I said, are the Native Americans of the Wild West Exodus setting, and they are absolutely fantastic. They have some fantastic lore attached to them, such as, well, Walk's looking. I've mentioned her again twice now, but she does have some really cool lore attached to her, such as her fall and redemption and her quest to find her soul. For a start, making that quest, a bit more fleshed out and what's actually happening would be an absolute boon to this faction. Seeing her having a full story of her fall to the Hex and becoming the monster that she became, and then to, be redeemed, have this monster ripped out of her and it taken half her soul. Honestly, it's fantastic. I think it's great. Any fall and redemption story is a fun story to read in the first place, and given this just the quality of writing within the Wild West Exodus, they could do a really good job of this. And I think, honestly, I do want to see more of her story. She has some. If you get the chance, buy the Heavy Rail graphic novel. She is in it, and you get to see how much of a badass she is in it. So that's the first one. The Walk's looking story would be absolutely amazing. Now, there is the political side. Now, this has really interested me. Given the time, it's an alternative timeline of Victorian era, or the Wild West, whichever one you want to go with. But it's that time period when you have people like Isambard King of Brunel, Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt. It's that time period. Which means there's things like the Federal Reservation Act, where Native Americans were rounded up and put into, they had to have certain land, and, they were pretty much separated from everyone else. And I don't like this act. I think it was a horrible act to put in force. But seeing this in this setting would have an entirely different effect. You have superpowered, people who could turn into werewolves, eagles. It adds this whole new element to any form of rebellion the Warrior Nation would commit to. And it gives them more power. And someone like Abraham Lincoln and the president at the time, with the dystopian wars going on, with, the war in the Atlantic and the war in the Pacific, these things probably wouldn't be such a big priority on their list, because they were just embattled on every side. You had the Enlightened and the Hex inland as well. And that's talking of the Hex, then you have the Warriors Nation and the Hex. The Warrior Nations are basically cannot use any Hex models. They can't ally with anyone with a taint. We can ally with a Union, which is an interesting part, but maybe because of the great spirit that they use for their own magic. I'm using magic as kind of a catch-all term here. The Hex might see this as a threat, or even the Order might think that the great spirit itself is the Hex. And it could lead to more forms of combat and conflict and misdirection. All this really interesting stuff on how they would interact with those two factions in particular, how the Warrior Nations interact with the Hex and how they would interact with the Order, would be interesting to see and sort of grown upon and shown even more. And I think that would be interesting. And just to sort of finish this video up, because there is so much to talk about when it comes to the Warrior Nation and the Wild West Exodus setting, the other ones is famous battles that actually happened. I understand some people don't like to touch upon these things in their alternate timelines because, they're sensitive subjects, and I understand this. Though it would be interesting to see how the Battle of Little Bighorn played out. General Custer is a playable is a model. You can get him in Wild West Exodus. Did he have some sort of device from the Enlightened that allowed him to see that the Indian, I was thinking of what there, the Native Americans were, hiding? Whether Warrior Nations were hiding? Could he see the scouts beforehand? All this interesting with the extra technology that Custer had to his hand. Would it have been a boost? Could it have turned the tables during that battle? I think it would have definitely changed a lot of the battle. Absolutely. But into which way, I don't know. Because the Warrior Nations do use guns as well. But their weapons are also magical. So how it would turn out, especially with the fact they can turn into these massive werewolves and stuff, how it would turn out would be completely different. It might be still the Warrior Nation wins, but how do they win? Interesting. I do think that'll be kind of cool to see. And the Red Sands Massacre as well. How does that turn out? Does it actually happen, or do the Warrior Nations defend their land and wipe out the Union attacking them? How does it play out? And it's interesting to see that these things happened within this timeline, but I would like to see how they actually turned out. This stuff, to me, is fascinating. It's one thing I like about alternate timelines, because it's interesting to see how certain things have turned out because of these new events and new things that have been added into the timeline. Resistance is one of my favourites, and that the way World War II finished, it never really finished because of the Chimera now, invading Earth. And same here with the things like the Enlightened. Would the Enlightened start arming the Warrior Nations? Or would the Warrior Nations not take their armaments because they want to use their weapons and believe their weapons are better? All these sort of interscene politics and how different factions would react with the Warrior Nations, and given their powers and their abilities now, how it would all play out would be so interesting to see. We know the Warrior Nations are happy to help the Union and the lawmen when necessary. We saw that in the Book of Lazarus, and how they saw what was coming. They ended up, trying to help the lawmen, such as Doc Holliday and the Union with Willa Shaw. So, like I said, interesting stuff. I do want to see more from the Warrior Nations. They are a fascinating faction. They have some of the best models in the game. But then I could be kind of biased because, like I said, I really like the faction. And they're one of the few factions that have what I would consider vehicles, with the Great Eagle / Thunderbird model and the legendary Cloud Runner. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you wish to purchase some War Cradle stuff, the best place to go is Wayland Games. Links down below. It's free delivery after £20. There is Forbidden Planet for comics, DVDs, mangas, Blu-rays, all the cool geeky stuff, toys and stuff. There's my merchandise, t-shirts, stickers, all the stuff that everyone else does. My comic, sorry about that, my comics as well. And there is Skyforge, always give that guy a click. And finally, Patreon, because I have to. Bye bye.